Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by Kurt Bardella. Kurt serves as a News Nation contributor and host of Kurt's Country. He joined the network just last year. Kurt has been a strategic communications advisor and media relations consultant for more than 2 decades. He's currently a contributor to the LA Times and has written for USA Today. He served as an advisor for the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in 2020 and 2022. Like me, he previously worked for a Republican, in particular, Representative Darrell Issa, when he was chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. During this time, he choreographed the media strategy for investigations related to the 2008 financial crisis, the bailouts of financial institutions, and more. Kurt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, my friend.
All right. Well, thanks again for doing this. And you and I were talking, I think, a couple of weeks ago and just sort of commiserating in the aftermath of November. And I don't want to spend too much time looking back. You and I have we crossed our own little Rubicons over the years, but I think in the right direction compared to so many of people we grew up with and we worked with previously. But give us a sense here now. We're, about 3 weeks into Trump 2.0. Give us a sense of how you see the world.
Unfortunately, I see the world exactly how I think many of us thought it would go. That, this time they know what they're doing and they're going to act swiftly with no remorse, no conscience, no care for the rule of law, no care for checks and balances. And they're just going to run roughshod over everybody. And the Democratic Party is not equipped to handle it. They're just not built to both the Democratic Party and really the quote legacy media. They are so flawed and so unprepared, which is shocking, by the way, since they've only been at this for like 8 years now. And for them to be caught so flat-footed and just plain ass weak is the most demoralizing part to me as someone who left the Republican Party, who I joined the Democratic Party. And every single day I bang my head against the wall, just going, my God, they don't make it easy to be on this side, just tactically.
No, and I was actually at an event this past weekend in New York City, and at an event, and the hosts were kind enough to call me out in front of the entire crowd because I'd previously seen them last fall, and I said the line they quoted, Kurt, was, the Democratic Party has a big tent, but you guys have an awfully small door, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy. It's not easy to be there. It's not easy to get in. There's a lot of litmus tests. And I don't want to over-index on that for now, but I do want to go back to your experience having served, Darrell Issa on the House Oversight Committee. If you were there, if you were on the Oversight Committee now, admittedly in the minority, which I know is a much different thing, especially in the U.S. House, what would you be telling our friends in Congress to be doing to at least show something, not telling people this is illegal or this is not the process or they have to give us 30-day notice? What would you be asking them to show specifically, I think right now, their supporters?
Yeah, it's funny. I just published a piece yesterday for The Hill, literally making the point. I think the headline was, what Democrats today could learn from the Republicans of 2009. And we were in a very similar position at the time. We had just gotten shellacked in '08. Obama won with an incredible mandate. It's hard to believe now. Democrats had like a 70-seat majority in the House
and 60 seats in the Senate.
Yeah, like we were deep in the minority, and there was going to be no way out anytime soon. And then Republican leader John Boehner comes to Darrell, who's about to become the ranking Republican on the Oversight Committee, and says, listen, from this point forward, we are no longer in the policymaking business. We are in the communications business, and everything you do should be seen through that worldview. And Boehner, for all of his challenges as leader, was 100% right about that. And Darrell really ingested that message and truly took it to heart. And we structured the committee that way. We recruited the members who other committees wanted nothing to do with, but we knew they were good communicators. We took Jim Jordan. We took Patrick McHenry. We took Mark Meadows. We took Mick Mulvaney. These names should sound familiar to people because they turned out to be running the show of the Republican Party from 2016 on. Democrats today need to learn from that playbook. When their contest for who would lead the ranking membership of the Democrats on the Oversight Committee was between Jerry Connolly and AOC. And let me tell you, forgetting about progressive versus centrist, forgetting about the ideological side of the Democratic Party, as a communicator, AOC is one of the most effective communicators on that dais. Elijah Cummings, the late, great Elijah Cummings, one of the last conversations I had with him before he died, and this is when he was chairman of the committee, recruited AOC to be on there. And he said, she is the most hardworking member we have on this committee. She does her homework. She shows up prepared. She is fantastic. I want her on our side. The fact that the Democrats, after losing in November, decided that, you know what we're going to do? We're going to put up Jerry Conley.
Right.
I have nothing against Mr. Conley. He's a great member. He served a long time. But the fact that they chose the old ways versus communicating tells you how ill prepared they are for what is going to happen. And everything right now, as we're talking, there's this Doge subcommittee hearing unfolding that Marjorie Taylor Greene is chairing, which are words I can't believe I'm saying out loud.
Are we on an ayahuasca trip here? What the heck is going on?
It's like, I don't know what dimension we're in right now,
Right.
but this version of the multiverse is nuts. But this would be a fantastic opportunity for Democrats to show up, step up, and drive home some actual good messaging communications. They're not prepared to do it. They're not doing it right. They don't get it.
Well, and I posted this the other day, this just very quick clip, of Connolly on MSNBC saying, I issued a subpoena for Elon Musk to come before the committee, and I was surprised my Republican counterparts didn't go along with me. And I'm like, what? Like, come on. And that's the thing is, like, I used to joke with our Democratic friends, Kurt, for the 5 years, I used to joke sort of tongue in cheek, I can't believe we ever lost to y'all. Right.
Yes.
Now I'm sort of like, we're lucky we didn't become a right-wing dictatorship 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that is one where, again, it's the show, don't tell, right? What is storytelling? It's not, exposition. It's the use of imagery and even spectacle.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that. That to me is the key word. I was having a conversation 2 days ago with a pretty prominent member of the House Democrats who was telling me, like, if there was one thing you could tell us as a party, if you ran a Democrat, what would you tell us? It's like, you need to get back to the art of storytelling, of long form story. This is a story of there are heroes, there are villains, there are archetypes, there are narratives. Maxine Waters standing in front of the Department of Education protesting is not a story we should be telling. That is, in fact, the exact opposite story we should be telling, if I'm being honest. I would tell every Democrat, every communicator, do what I did 3 weeks ago. I took my 8-year-old to his first ever live WWE event in Dallas, and it was awesome, by the way. Just as a dad to watch your kid watch something that you grew up watching as well. It's the best feeling in the world. But one of my friends, is literally, they have the title there, director of long form storytelling for their scripts. And they plot out, he's telling me, we don't just look at where we want to be a year from now with a certain story. They look at it 3 years from now and work backwards from there, which blew my mind, frankly. I was so impressed with that. And I apply that to politics. It's like, what story do we want to be telling in 2028, in the 2028 election? And let's work backwards from there. And every day, find a way to make every issue, every story about at least some part of that messaging, instead of chasing the riderless horses that Donald Trump and MAGA send out every day that Democrats can't help but follow. The Democrats love nothing more than to feel outraged about something and to express that outrage. And we're at a point now where it just comes off as whiny, and the American people are completely tuned out to it. We got to get back to telling stories.
Well, and it's not just that comes off as whiny, is that every bear trap, that's my favorite metaphor, although I do like riderless horse, is, designed, whether or not it's DEI or trans sports or whatever, everything is designed to do that exact thing, which is to get the Democratic elite and the media and the talking head class to jump into the bear trap gleefully. Right. And
Yes.
What does that practically do? It allows for the White House to say, we told you, this is who we told you they were. This is how out of touch we told you where they were. And look, over and over again, they don't care about you. They don't care about the issues that matter to you. They're just talking about this stuff that we're, Kurt, trying to get rid of because it's quote unquote common sense. And they can't help themselves. And to your point about Ocasio-Cortez, she understands that. And I think there was a Republican member, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Tim Burchett from Tennessee, who was like, I'm really happy they didn't give her the job. Like, they took their best player off the field. Like, when your opponent is saying, yeah, we took Jalen Hurts off the field, for Kenny Pickett, like, I'm sure Pickett could manage a few handoffs, right? But he ain't a Super Bowl quarterback.
Yeah, that's right. Democrats fall for that so often. It's like, I always say the biggest difference I've observed just as an operative and working for Republicans and working with Democrats, so many times in conversations, Democrats, somebody in that room, in that meeting, on that Zoom will say, well, if we do that, what if the Republicans do X, Y, or Z? And I can tell you, as a Republican, at one time when I worked at the Oversight Committee, did the words, well, what if the Democrats do this ever come up? We could care less. Like, you're going to do what you're going to do. We're going to do our thing. May the best man win. Democrats are so afraid of their own shadow, and everything requires a what if this, what if that, what if this. It's like, my God, these guys, you think Donald Trump or Stephen Miller or Russ Vogt are sitting there going, gee, what if the Democrats don't like what we're about to do?
Right.
They're
Well,
not doing that.
I remember, gosh, it must have been the 2022 cycle, and we were talking to a guy who was running the super PAC for, I think it was ultimately going to be Shapiro in Pennsylvania against
Hmm.
what's his name, the nut, the guy who was the Republican member of the legislature,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and we were like, you have to go after him on these things now, and it was like showing up in a Confederate uniform and all these things, and they're like, but if we do that, it might energize his supporters, and we were like, wait. You see, if you're energizing their supporters, you're energizing them on the idea of like, it's okay to show up at an army base in a Confederate uniform. You understand that, right? Second, last fall, we were doing this call, doing a Zoom with a very senior Democratic operative, and they were going through the rubric they use to test ads. And don't get me started on that, Kurt. We could do 4 hours just on that alone. And they had this thing called the blowback score. And we're like, what is that? And they said, that's how we recognize whether or not the ad upsets somebody. And we were all just dumbfounded. And they're like, what's the problem? I'm like, that's the whole point. Like, the whole point is blowback, right? Like,
Yes.
do you think that when Chris LaCivita crafted the trans ad, he's for you, she's for they, them, he was worried about blowback? No, that was what he was looking for. And it was just
Right.
amazing to us that they were going out of their way to shave off the sharp edges of an ad that might get attention outside the cockamamie money you're spending on gross rating points or digital advertising that goes into the ether for no purpose. It just didn't make any sense to me. The whole point, as you said, is predicated on what if. But what
Yeah.
if? Well, what if you don't do it right? Now you're finding out what happens. What if you don't do it right?
And it's like, I don't know about you, but I'm the kind of operative fighter. Like, I'd rather go down and lose knowing I went too far
Mm-hmm.
than go down and lose and having not gone far enough. That's just how I'm wired. Maybe that's the former Republican in me. I don't know.
No,
But
as I've told people before, it's the just win baby theory of being a young Republican operative. The only thing is to win, right? Did we ever think our party and the people in it were going to take it as far as they have? Certainly not.
oh, of
But
course not.
we understood that, as I've said before, American politics has been rough and tumble since the beginning. Remember that the founding of the country, or at least the third president of the country, was decided by Aaron Burr killing Alexander Hamilton, right? This
Yep.
is not exactly, as George H.W. Bush said, it ain't beanbag, right? Like, this is
Mhm.
rough and tumble stuff. And if you're not willing to play hardball, then somebody's going to bean you in the head like Bob Gibson in the 60s. All right, let me move on. So sticking to your other expertise, which is the media. Now, one thing I don't understand is, as we're seeing now, Donald Trump and the Trump administration are basically ignoring federal court orders. Not
Mhm.
surprising. I don't know why anybody was surprised by this, why anybody is surprised by this. Is it going to be a constitutional crisis? I guess, but if a constitutional crisis happens and no one got upset, is it really a constitutional crisis? And I say that
Exactly.
tongue in cheek, but like, it's a serious question. But you see the headlines about this stuff, Kurt, and it says judge halts Trump X, judge
Mhm.
stops Trump Y. But the truth is, that's not an accurate headline. The judge has handed down an order to say stop doing this. And at this point, Elon Musk is already deep in the Treasury Department. They've already taken the letters off the wall at USAID. And why is the media having so much trouble understanding, just like our Democratic friends, like, that the world has fundamentally changed and you need to express it as it is, not as you knew it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the refrain from Democrats that I can't stand, is, well, but that's not right, or that's not fair, or that's not how it should be. And it's like, if we lived in the world of how it should be versus what it is, we'd all be doing something different for a living by now.
Right.
Yeah, there would be no utility for us,
Right.
which I would very much look
Listen,
forward to that day.
me too.
I would love to never have these conversations ever again. But that's always been my beef with the Democrats. Is like, it's like working the refs constantly. It's like, well, that's not fair, or we're not getting a fair shake, or you're not doing this right. It's like, you got to live in the world. as it is and try to make it the world that you want it to be. But as you do that, you have to just be realistic about where we really are. And I think one of the biggest challenges I have with Democrats is anytime you try to voice any of this and provide honestly God constructive criticism, they treat it as such an affront. I had someone on Twitter literally ask me when I posted my column about messaging and comms. Someone, listen, are you MAGA now? It's like, why would that be your response? Would you rather all of us just go, oh, no, no problem here. Everything's going great. We're doing the best we can. We should fix nothing. We shouldn't recalibrate at all. It's like, if we're going to fix this thing and have a chance at winning an election ever again, like we have to be honest about the failings of the last cycle, of which there were aplenty. And maybe it I know you get this because I get it all the time of the, well, you used to be a Republican, can we trust you? It's like, maybe you should listen to the people who not only were Republicans but fought you guys and whooped your asses all the time. Like, there's a reason why we were able to do that. I can tell you it's not because our product is so much better than yours or our ideas are so much better than yours. Like it's because you guys hide and are afraid of your own shadow, and we're all about just winning. Maybe you could learn from that.
Well, let me just say this as a point of personal privilege. When I hear that, Kurt, my first thing, I used to have more grace about that, but now I don't. I say to people who say, well, you used to be a Republican, how can we trust you? This is what I say. What have you done? What have you put on the line? Have you put your career? Have you been threatened with violence or death because of the actions you've taken to fight this? Are you the one who stood up against your own party, against the president of your own party, and said, we cannot and should not do this anymore? Because until and unless you've put something like that on the line, I don't really want to hear that you don't trust me. Okay? Because I have earned the trust, I believe, of our fellow Americans in saying not one step further. Now, we lost. Don't get me wrong. Right. And I have a lot of soul searching and we have a lot of ways to move forward. But the idea of, as in therapy speak, Kurt, of, an entire political party living on the moral mountain, right? You can do that. But one, it's lonely up there. And two, nobody wants to hang out with you. Right. If everything you're going to do is predicated on the idea, one, that you're afraid of doing anything, and two, that if anybody does anything, by definition, you're going to criticize it, then why does anybody want to hang out with you? Why does anybody want to be on that team? And I say that out of love because they're the only damn party we got left, right? Like we need to help them win in the places that A, they should win, and B, the places they haven't even competed in years.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I think, no matter what all of our respective failings and things that we've gotten wrong, I know at least, I would say there's an alternate universe in which Reed Galen and Kurt Bardella and Rick Wilson and whoever are filthy rich with our own Fox News program. We were the White House press secretary. Like there is another universe where where that version of ourselves that didn't risk anything is personally thriving and wouldn't have a care in the world. People don't get it, but we risk everything: our personal lives, our financial stability, our professional relationships. All of us who spent decades building a network and a professional reputation, we literally lit it on fire because we literally were willing to say, like you said, not one step further. And it came with a cost. I don't regret that. I sleep at night very well, knowing which side of this fight that I have been on. But I love that response. I'm going to adopt that too, I think, because it is right. You want to criticize me, you want to question my credentials or my motivations or my past employment history. It's like, what have you sacrificed in this fight?
Well, and I can tell you without mentioning names or positions, a guy that was once my best friend in the world, Kurt, is now an assistant to the president of the United States. And for White House speak, there are what are called commissioned officers. There's assistants to the president. These are the people that could walk into the Oval Office without permission, right? There are deputy assistants to the president who run a division over at the EOB or something. And then there's special assistants to the president, and they're like, whatever it is, they're the next junior level, right? They're still very senior, but they're the lowest level of commissioned officer. And, this is where we are. People had to make their choices. I saw something on Substack this morning, a guy saying a question to Republicans, like, when will it be too much? I'm like, you don't need to ask the question anymore. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as too much.
Yeah, gluttony. I mean, it's power gluttony at this point. Their mantra, I feel like right now, their attitude is it's too much when you're able to stop us, then it'll be too much. Until then, we're going to keep going.
Yeah, and that's something going back to Mary Trump's first book about her uncle was
Hmm.
that, and this helped me understand everything about Trump's psychology, was that going back to when he was in elementary school, because he was so desperate for attention, he would do the craziest thing he could think of and see what would happen. And you know what happened, Kurt? People would just stop and stare, but nobody stopped him. And that's been his whole thing. Just do it. No one is likely to stop you. And that's where we are now. But I want to turn to a different thing that I think you and I talked about. So back in November, post-election, pre-Thanksgiving, my mom and I were back in Washington, D.C. for my dad's memorial service. And we had dinner with a bunch of people. There were about 100 people that came, and it was lovely. And it was very appreciative to see all these people who he meant so much to. But the one thing that I saw, even in just a couple of weeks after the election, was that everybody in town, everybody in DC, Kurt, Republican, Democrat, otherwise, had already gotten in line. Everybody was
Hmm.
now from the end of the world is coming, or, we're going to have to figure out how to work with this guy again, to, okay, now how do I survive? How do I thrive? How do I profit over the course of the next 4 years? And I include Democrats in that, who are in the very senior lobbying ranks, very senior consulting ranks,
Right.
because you know as well as I do that if a Republican friend of theirs who's connected to Trump says, listen, I need you to come in on this $2 million, $3 million, $4 million project, you know as well as I do, they're not going to say no. And of course, the refrain
Hmm.
is, well, I have a business, I employ people, et cetera, et cetera. But it seems to me now that DC's always been a transactional town. Imperial capitals always have been throughout history. But now it's just like, well, we lost again. I guess as Jen O'Malley Dillon said, well, that sucks. I guess we'll get him in 2028. Yeah, if there is a 2028.
You look at what they're doing right now. You don't dismantle the entire system, and by the entire, I mean the entire checks and balance system, unless you believe that you're going to have open road ahead of you. If you actually think you'll meet legitimate, true resistance, you don't do it this way. We'll be lucky, and I don't mean this as an alarmist. I don't mean this as a hyperbole. Like, we'll be lucky if by 2028, mind you, we're 3 weeks into this thing.
Right. We got a
Uh,
long
you
time.
know,
Right.
so if in 180 weeks from now, um, you know, we are we are able to have an election like we had in November ever again, the way that this is going. Because we have the sitting president, vice president of the United States outwardly saying the judicial branch basically should not exist as it currently is. That unless you agree with me, your job should no longer exist. That an independent judicial branch is actually an obstruction element to the executive, therefore it needs to go away. It's like, if you don't think that they can't make that so. And if you think that they're just saying things to troll or own the libs, like, paying attention, like, they mean every single thing that they say, and they will try to do it because their lived experience at this point is, we're going to do our thing. The liberals will bellyache and whine. The media will, like, write one or two things, but ultimately they're both sides ism will get the best of them, and so it won't really be the true story anyway. And then we'll get away with it and keep going.
Right. And
It's like, there's
they've already put forth, I don't remember who it was or who the judge was, but I think they've already put forth impeachment articles for one of the federal judges that told either Musk or Trump to stop doing something. Right. Which will also have a real live effect on, I mean, look, I think that federal judges, non-Trump federal judges, take their jobs very seriously, as they should. But at some point, they're going to get steamrolled too, as more
yeah.
and more of these judges decide it's not worth the trouble. It'll get filled up with more and more loyalists, as we saw with like Eileen Cannon in South Florida. And so and at some point, look, I had Brendan Ballou on a couple of weeks ago. The January 6th pardons also give license to a lot of non-affiliated MAGA adherents to maybe go take matters into their own hands.
Yeah, this is gonna, at the rate that it's going, this is gonna result in judges getting very legitimate and dangerous threats about them and their family if they do not comply or submit. And the chilling effect that will have on our system, it's irreversible.
Right. All
And
right.
people are going to ask themselves, how much do they really want to put themselves through it? Is it worth it?
Right. And that is the human reaction. That is the normal reaction. That is the logical reaction. If faced with a threat that is overwhelming, do you try and get away from the threat, or do you stand in front of the bear and let it eat you? All right, let me switch gears pretty significantly. So Kurt, aside from politics, you are also an enormous music guy. You know everything there is to know about music, particularly country music. But I want to move to hip hop for a second. And two things, one thing that I love and one thing that you love. So I love football, and
Yep.
I liked watching the Super Bowl, and seeing the Chiefs get dismantled was something else. But I want to talk about the halftime show. So the Super Bowl has been a cultural phenomenon for the last 30, 40 years, right? And excuse me. And the halftime show, for years, remember, it was like Billy Joel and The Who, and they just kept recycling all these old people. And now they've sort of updated things with Rihanna and those kinds of people. This year they had Kendrick Lamar, who is a very very well thought of, incredibly talented songwriter. I think he actually won a Pulitzer Prize.
Yep.
And his entire stage show was layered in meaning and with visuals and storytelling, as we talked about that earlier. Mm-hmm. But it's also become a fascinating cultural discussion. There was obviously the Drake piece of it, which, his now smash song, They Not Like Us. And I understand I am the they, right? In that song. I get it. I'm not that dense. But it was interesting to see how that cultural phenomenon got people talking of different races, different demographics, different ages, different geographies. Some people loved it, some people hated it. But as what's his name, Breitbart used to say, right? Politics is downstream from culture. And it seems like Kendrick Lamar very much, and again, this is a guy who's very exacting in his songwriting, and I assume he was very exacting in the design of this presentation as well, this performance as well, that he did something that really only like a Donald Trump has been able to do, which is, admittedly, it will fade over the next few days, but he has been able to dominate the cultural conversation in this country with an 18-minute halftime performance.
Yes, the takeaway from the Super Bowl, even more so than the game, was Kendrick Lamar's halftime performance. And, 132 million people watched that thing. It's the most watched halftime performance in the history of the Super Bowl. And the reaction from the right, particularly, just melting the fuck down. And it's the only time in recent memory that I can think of where they ended up acting like the whiny liberals in this case, right? Like the pendulum was turned upside down on them. And when I watch, I'm like, that's the blueprint right there. That is storytelling. That is compelling. It is edgy. It is unapologetic. It is in your face. This is who I am, done in such a smart and savvy. Republicans, by and large, have done a really good job of owning the cultural conversation over the last few years, whether it's tapping into combat sports like UFC and WWE, or country music, seeing people like Kid Rock and Jason Aldean, with Trump at inauguration, just doing a great job of turning their political ideology into a cultural statement. This is the first time that I've seen the other side of the equation take that back and put them on their heels, put them on the defensive, have them whining and complaining and just sounding like the party it's kind of like the George H.W. Bush party. Like, you guys are so uncool. You're always complaining about those kids and their damn music. Like, that's what it felt like for the first time. It's like, oh, you guys aren't the cool people now.
Right.
Like, for this one moment in time, Kendrick Lamar is. Democrats, take note. That is the way. That's the conversation we want to have. Kendrick Lamar is masterful. He is a poet in the truest sense of the word, and his meticulousness and attention to detail in his songwriting and the presentation of it, you could not have asked for a more, I think, effective way to try to balance the scales of the cultural conversation that we've been having for a while now.
Right. And I thought that the use of the American flag imagery, right, obviously very layered, was brilliant, because now you have
Uncle Sam,
right? You've got guys sputtering the American flag, because I mean, every year we do something in right before Flag Day called Take Back the Flag, which is, the American flag is our symbol. It's not their symbol. It's our symbol. And I thought it was a fascinating use of that kind of imagery. And of course, Samuel L. Jackson is, he's brilliant in his own way. And they did so much of that again, you have to go back and watch it almost scene for scene. I'll call it scene for scene, Kurt, to understand all of the stuff that happened. Because when you're watching it in real time, there's so much stuff that goes by you so quickly. But again, it's dominating so much of the online space, and it's getting, look, when I was at or we were at our friend's house for the Super Bowl, like the teenagers were all singing along. They knew all his songs.
Oh, I mean, it was again it was the most profound, powerful cultural statement that the non Donald Trump side has had, that I have seen maybe ever, in all honesty. And I think it also kind of tells you like Democrats, like we all this shit's serious. We get it. Like it's important. It is as serious can be. But sometimes you have to be irreverent. Sometimes you have like humor is such a powerful weapon against fascism, and we don't use it enough. That's one thing I always felt, again, for all of our flaws, that LP did so well was using humor and tongue in cheek and sarcasm and edge. And we know that it worked because we were living in Trump's, mind rent free for years. That's how you get to them. They don't like being the butt of the joke. They can't stand it. They don't know. It makes them malfunction and shut the fuck down. We need to do that more often to them.
No, I think that's right. And, I want to go back to the irreverent thing too, because, you've seen so much, and I'm sure you've seen it too, of, the left needs its own podcasters, the left needs its own Joe Rogan and all this stuff. And the truth is that irreverence is really entertainment, right? And it didn't start with Joe Rogan. It started with people like Rush Limbaugh, right? In
Yes.
the 80s. And Rush, look, if you look at, like, Rush didn't care about any of this stuff, right? All Rush wanted was more listeners, more advertising money, so he could have Elton John at his fourth wedding and an unobstructed opioid addiction, right? Like that, those were his goals, right? And if being crazy on the radio 3 or 4 hours a day did it, that was fine with him, right? Totally fine with him.
It's like, this is where, again, it kind of blows my mind because we're repeating the same cycle. Growing up and learning politics at a younger age, like I grew up listening to Rush. I grew up listening to, San Diego, Roger Hitchcock.
Sure, of course.
And
John
we had
and
a
Ken
whole
in LA.
stable.
Yeah, right.
Yes, KFI, John and Ken. It's like today's podcast, like is a direct origin from talk radio, which our side dominated. And you would have thought after living that cycle already one time that the Democrats would figure out like, oh, today's Joe Rogan is yesterday's Rush Limbaugh. Where is our version of that? Where on earth is our response to that? The only entity that has successfully created a politically charged podcast that was both entertaining, informative, and took the fight to the other side and actually charted at the top of the chart was what we did back in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
That our side does not come close to anything like that. Again, for all the flaws, and there are many, as we all know, like we did some things right that are worth looking at and trying to create and finding personality to combat this. Because right now we have nothing. And I'm going to tell you, anyone who's waiting on MSNBC or the Washington Post or all those people to do the work for you, Democrats, it's not fucking happening.
Well, I just, I'll say this. I mean, it's the idea of listening to somebody, it'd be Rogan or somebody else for 3 hours, or like the last thing in the world I would ever do is probably listen to Chris Hayes on the radio for 3 hours, because I don't need to be told how not smart I am. Right? Like, I don't need that. Right. I got to know. I got a wife and 2 daughters. I get enough of that in my daily life. I don't need it from my radio shows too. But I think you're right. But again, it's that whole idea that is, if I say the wrong thing, will I get canceled? Who will I offend? There's this orthodoxy that must be obeyed. And I'll tell you, I think at its core, Kurt, until you can break that orthodoxy, it's going to be really difficult. Until a guy like John Tester in Montana can run as a Democrat, a blue dog Democrat in Montana, and not be overwhelmed with all of the stuff 2,500 miles away that he's got to contend with, right? Democrats had senators in both the Dakotas, in Nebraska, right? Like Missouri. These are things that have happened. But once they lost, they're just like, okay, I guess we're out. Well, you know what? Like we're out of turf. We're out of territory, right? We got to turn around and like say, again, we talked about this earlier, like not one more step. And that is necessarily going to mean you have to answer one very serious question, fundamental question. Do you want purity or do you want victory? Because
that's right.
You can't have one with the other. And if you're going to be, if you want purity, go to church, right? Like go to church. Don't go to the ballot box.
Yeah. Well, and, again, in places like West Virginia, where up until recently we had a senator, and you look at the states that you just listed where we used to have representation, even Ohio, it's like, if your answer to that political problem is to correct your voter because they didn't use the right pronoun, you're fucked. Like, what are you doing? Like, come on. Not that, obviously, yes, it should go without saying, I'm for everyone being able to be whatever the fuck they want to be. I could care less, to be quite honest with you. We have bigger fish to fry than worrying about letters of the alphabet. And we spend an inordinate amount of time and cast an incredible amount of judgment on people who don't say it the quote right way. And all you're doing is just telling people, just don't say anything at all. It's like, because again, it's not worth the fucking trouble. It's not worth the trouble of getting involved if my own side is going to attack me. Get the message. We all generally want the same things here, and we may arrive at it in different ways, but we want the same things. Stop firing at each other, for the love of God. Like, we are not the enemy, and there's no way we're going to be able to beat these guys if we're too busy policing our own side all the time. It's crazy.
Right. Well, I mean, as I said to the people over the past few years, like, we don't have to agree on everything. We just have to agree on one thing, right? And if, we're successful and we toss this guy out and these people go the way of the dodo and you want to start your internecine fights again, like, that's on you, right? But right now, like, there's a 5-alarm fire and you guys are arguing about who gets to hook the hose up,
Yep.
to the pumper truck. And it's the wrong thing, or who gets to hold the fire hose, whatever. All right, I'll stop with the metaphor. All right, Kurt, before I let you go, first, I want to say thank you for joining me. But where can everybody find all of your various work and Kurt's Country and whatever else you might be working on?
Yep. So I'm still on X at Kurt Bardella. I don't believe in retreat. I don't believe in leaving platforms and surrendering them to the other side because you cannot beat something with nothing. I'm also on all the other ones too as at Kurt Bardella. And I'm on Instagram at Kurt Takes, and I'm on News Nation every day, and I'm on Country Music Land every day, and doing all the things. But that's also that's the one thing I'll leave you with is everyone who does the like, I'm leaving this platform. It's like, okay, but just know your enemies get stronger on what you leave behind. It's a lesson from The Godfather, actually, that when the Corleones pulled out of New York and went to Nevada, their enemies got stronger on the ground that they surrendered. And for everybody who wants to leave places and cancel people and retreat, just know the other side's ready to scoop that up.
As we've seen, as they have done all over the country. As
Yep.
always, gang, you can find me on Twitter and TikTok and sez.us at Reed Galen, on Threads and Instagram at Reed_Galen USA, and of course over at Substack, also the home front. Kurt Bardella, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, my friend. We'll talk soon.
And everybody else, we'll see you next time.